Financial markets in turmoil.
What are the root causes of the financial crisis?
The dollar losing value.
Heading for its biggest loss in nearly 3 decades.
Will Social Security even be there?
I don't know.
Buy or rent?
That's a very good question.
Interest rates.
I'm not so sure.
Where do you put your money?
I don't know.
Welcome to the show that answers your questions. This is Follow the Money Weekly with your host, economist, and best-selling author. Here's Jerry Robinson.
Friends, welcome to this week's edition of Follow the Money Weekly. So glad that you're joining us all around the world. We have an exciting show lined up for you today. We're going to start with an interview with Tom Cloud, our precious metals advisor. Have you seen gold and silver lately? Gold at very steep lows. I mean, I guess it's down to probably testing a new triple bottom on the chart pattern now. Silver below $18. And of course, much of this has to do with a very strong dollar that is coming about because people are scared about the overall war. They're looking for things that are stable, and they think of the U.S. dollar, which is very ironic, but the dollar is going up based upon this. So we're going to talk with Tom about what's happening in the metals, what he's hearing from his suppliers and from his contacts in Europe. We'll find out Tom's thoughts on gold and silver in that interview. After the interview, we will have, of course, Jennifer will be here with her Trigger Trade Report update, where we'll be talking about how our trades did this week. And then after that, we're going to tackle the topic of this war with ISIS and now spreading into Syria. There is just no constitutional approval for this. There's no declaration of war. And we're going to talk a little bit about the history of that and also the history of flip-flops with Mr. Obama. Remember candidate Obama? This is what he had to say. I'll give you a little sneak peek. This is what he had to say about the Iraq War whenever he was running for office. This was the promise he was making. Roll the tape.
I will promise you this, that if we have not gotten our troops out by the time I am president, it is the first thing I will do. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
And then he also added this.
Time to admit that no amount of American lives can resolve the political disagreement that lies at the heart of someone else's civil war.
So you can tell, obviously, it's very different from the tone that he's giving now. And so if that's interesting to you, hang around for segment 2. We'll tackle that topic. Boy, what a doozy. And then finally, if you hang around to the very end, we've got a little surprise for you. We are launching a brand new, very, very brief podcast, kind of like our new stock trading podcast that we have done. This one's called The Kingdom Way, and I think you'll really like it. I think it's a pretty neat podcast, so stick around to the end of the show for that. But right now, we're going to head over to our interview with Tom Cloud on our Precious Metals Market Update.
Follow the Money Weekly presents your Precious Metals Market Update. Here's Tom Cloud.
It has been a very interesting 2 or 3 days. It's been an interesting year, but the last 2 or 3 days have not made a lot of sense, but we're here to talk about that.
Yeah, Tom, we're sitting here looking at a price of gold and seeing on the chart that gold seems to be nearing a new triple bottom, and a lot of investors are pointing at the Fed's recent dovish tone to explain the sudden fall in metals prices. So it seems as if the current Fed policy has become the arch enemy of the gold bulls. Some investors are selling, especially those on the ETF side, seeing holdings in the SPDR Gold Trust ETF falling to their lowest level since December of 2008. But on the other hand, you see strong U.S. Mint bullion sales this week compared to last week, nearly triple for gold and nearly, doubled for silver coins. And also, as you've pointed out in the past, central banks are not selling their gold holdings. So what are your thoughts on this severe decline we've seen over the last couple of weeks?
Well, it's like when you get momentum, these momentum traders, there's a lot of different names you can call, but when people are going long and short, and certainly we have seen, especially in the silver market, much more in the gold, as people pick up this momentum with people going short, and it comes down until they have to cover those shorts. We get a bounce. You just have to try to see where it's going to go. With the ratio today, silver over nearly 69 to 1, gold being 60 times more valuable. And once again, we've seen it go from 65 to 69. So silver has been really weak. Gold has been weak too. But I'm like you. I think we're going to see a triple bottom on gold somewhere in the 1180 range, like we saw June of 2013, and then earlier this year, right after the first of the year. And I do think that will be the bottom, and we've talked about that with clients over the last few weeks. And also, very importantly, some of the timing services that we take in addition to our own work, think gold is going to go to 1,200 or 1,180 before it turns. Now, silver is a lot more, controversial, if you will, a lot harder to figure out, because we all remember in 2008 when silver went all the way down to $10 at the fall of 2008, and by November of 2011, it was over $45. It gone up 4.5 times in 36 months when everybody gave up on it. And I think this is very similar to that. I'm not saying it's going to go up 3.5 times, but certainly I think it's easy to get a double once we find a bottom. But the bottom could be as low as 1550 when you look at all the different forms of Fibonacci math count and the Elliott wave and momentum trading. You look at all these different ways, and you can find charts showing as low as 1550 where silver is going, down to about 1725, which is the most one we see the most in that area. And here, as we record this, it's around 17 in the 1780s. So I do think we'll get a clear direction here soon, because the last clear direction we got was straight down. We were waiting 2 weeks ago for something to happen, and it's happened, and it hasn't gone our way.
Tom, both you and I are, I would say, Austrian. When we approach our economics, we are very much realists. We've seen history. We know how the Federal Reserve can goose these markets. And I'll tell you, just, for the folks who are listening right now, if they're wondering if I'm selling my gold and silver at these levels, I'm not. I really believe that we're going to see another very strong push higher. And it's inevitable in my mind, because the economic laws that the Fed has been bending for some time, and many would make the case that since 1913, since they got put in place, that they've been operating as a bender of the economic laws. They've been trying to violate them and test the boundaries, just like we see in technology now, where they're mutating genes and they're trying to do different things. We were even reading about the PayPal CEO, former CEO, Peter Thiel, trying to come up with a solution to death. I mean, we're living in this time, Tom, where everybody's trying to bend the laws that we know, and they're trying to push them further. And that's really what the Fed has done with economic laws. They have just simply bent them. They have tried to manipulate them. But eventually, I'm of the persuasion that you can only hold the beach ball below the water for so long, it has to come up. Now, I think the question is, Tom, is everybody has is when. When does it come up? And of course, you and I can't answer that. But how do you respond to people who want to know when? I mean, what's the best thing that we can tell them now?
Well, I think the best thing today, I talked to a client out in California a little earlier today, and the husband and wife both on the phone, and we were saying, I said, if I'd asked you a year ago if gold got down to this level, down to the where it is in the low 1210s, would you want me to buy you? And you'd said, yeah, buy me $200,000 or $300,000 worth, and send us a bill. And I said, now you've had that opportunity, you got to look at where it stands now. And the one thing we talked about a little bit last week is, the fiscal year ends next week in the United States, and for the 6th straight year, we've got over $1 trillion budget deficit, but the Congress and Senate, just let Obama have back in January to help the economy. They didn't want to scare people that all this money is being printed. They just let the president create all he wanted with no checks and balances, just print it as you need it. And now we've talked about $17 trillion. Now we're doing $18 trillion of budget deficits, and that is always going to come back to hurt you. Like you said, the beach ball pops out of the water. But I tell people, if you look at, you think gold at 1210 or 1215 and silver at 1785 is not a good buy long term, I wouldn't buy it. But I don't know of anything after this drop that offers the potential that gold and silver offer. I know that's hard to swallow when your gold is going almost back to where it started the year, and silver now is below where it started the year back in January. So it is hard, but how do you just say wait on the sidelines and be patient and add to it when you see it moving, or buy and not worry about it, forget about it, because you are going to get a tremendous profit from it. And this market is still in a bull market. Every single timer we use has gold and silver still in a bull market, even with the drop. remember what happened to stocks in the mid-'90s when they dropped 40% and then took off like a rocket one last time. And we'll see the same thing in these metals. But like you said, neither you nor I can tell our listeners exactly when that's going to happen. But if you've got money you don't need for a year or two, I don't know any place you're going to do better than gold and silver from the levels we are right now.
You know, earlier, Tom, I just said that I wasn't planning on selling my holdings, and I want to reiterate that and explain why. And that is because I'm not using them as speculative type of investments. In other words, I don't need this money to double or triple over the next, year or two. When I buy gold and silver, I do so as an insurance policy, so to speak, an insurance policy against an out-of-control federal government, an out-of-control Federal Reserve, a fiat money system that has gone worldwide. And so when I buy gold and silver, I'm just holding it. At some point, there will be a time to sell, but at the same time, we don't know how long these bozos can bend the laws of economics. So let me say this. It may be, Tom, that my gold and silver fully reaches its fullest potential when I'm much, much older or whenever I pass it on to my children. So the thing is that, I think it all depends on why you're buying gold. If you're buying gold because you want it to, double or triple real quickly, well, that may or may not happen, but if you're buying it as an insurance policy against a very out-of-control money regime that we have here in the United States, it does seem to make sense. Now, we had talked about silver just briefly. On July 1st, the dollar began a real sharp upward movement to its current level. It really just got on a tear starting July 1st. And the last time that we saw the dollar at this level was back in July of 2013, so about a year before this current run. And when it pulled back after it hit that level, it's actually at the same level that it was back in July of 2013. As soon as it hit that level, it acted like a ceiling, and the dollar came pulling back. And as the dollar pulled back, gold jumped up by $200 in about 2 or 3 months. It soared from $1,600 to $1,800, and silver rose from $19 to about $25 in just about 2 months. So it could be that we're on the cusp of one of those moments where the dollar has kind of reached the ceiling where it has previously, and any kind of pullback from this place is going to see gold and silver go higher. Is that true?
It is true. It's definitely one of the possibilities is out there. And like I said, these momentum traders now are the ones that are wreaking havoc with the markets. I mean, not just gold and silver. They do it with other commodities and stock indices also when that's where the volatility is. But, yeah, I think that's a very good overview of the possibilities. There's, the possibility of stagnation. It sits around these levels for a little while. It has an immediate bounce like you're talking about as the dollar weakens, or we see the central banks coming in and buying, and we see the Shanghai Exchange that's been open now today's the third business day, and the premiums on Friday, I haven't checked today, but the premiums they're selling physical gold for in China are staggering compared to what our clients pay. I mean, the premiums are nearly double to sell physical metal, and that's what the people are buying in China and paying a lot higher premium than our clients pay here.
I know silver is hovering right now at about 4-year lows, and it has a lot of people concerned. And we keep hearing the experts point back to current Fed policy. They keep pointing back and saying it's the Fed. It's the Fed's dovish tone. The Fed is causing the metals to go down in value. Can you briefly explain for our folks what it is that the Fed has said or that the Fed has done that is putting pressure on metals? What exactly is it so the investors out there can know what to listen for when the Fed opens its mouth?
Well, when the Fed opens its mouth, everything's either going to be dovish or hawkish, and as you look at it, you still got to keep the eye on several things. The dollar, how it's going to be affected by what the Fed says, and certainly the Fed comes in and here they've gone and put $85 billion a month into quantitative easing, nearly another $1 trillion, and then they start cutting it $10 billion a month, and people celebrate like something good has happened, and we're still creating $35 billion a month. We've cut 50 off, but we're still creating $35 billion a month and money out of thin air to buy mortgage-backed securities. So you look at this thing, and all they're trying to do, of course, is get the economy from falling off the table. We get weak economic news and weak employment news last week and the week before, and no matter how much they create, it doesn't get better, but because the dollar got stronger, it's weakened these metals, and now all of a sudden industry's raising cane saying, we don't want a strong dollar. We can't sell anything. So the Fed has to balance all of this and try to keep the dollar. They really don't want the dollar strong because no country in the world, they want to sell and export items to keep employment up. So it is a fine thing, but who's been driving this thing has been the momentum traders. They just latch on to something. First it was Bernanke, now it's Yellen, and they make it into something, and then 3 days later it's old news. And that's what, like you said earlier, you get people now trying to figure out how not to die, and you just see crazy things like this out there. And when you sit and looked at it, if people were sitting and looking at the way we handle these markets to the people that trained me 35, 40 years ago in this business, they would just literally turn over in their grave to see the way it's done. And people looking, there's $18 trillion you owe. Your country's bankrupt. And the lady comes out and makes a 10-minute speech, and gold goes down $20, and the stock market goes up 2%. I mean, just think how crazy that is.
Nothing at all materially changed. All that was said was, like you said, it was just mere words that came out of her mouth, and then you suddenly see this shift. It shows you that we really are living in a faith-based economy. There is nothing backing this at all. It's literally the Fed coming out, pushing ideas, making statements, and then, of course, investors responding to those statements. And I guess, at some point, Tom, the investors have become so accustomed to Fed intervention that if we do see a pullback, we keep hearing about how, the market's going to completely implode. Well, let's say that it does. How in the world can the Federal Reserve just stand on the sidelines and watch the market fall? They're going to step back in with more quantitative easing, and of course that starts the whole cycle all over again.
You've heard Germany say, we'll never do it for 3-4 years. And who was leading the quantitative easing 3 weeks ago? Germany. Of course, you had Portugal, Spain, and Italy all officially in recession. So, it's all about manipulation and changing. But one thing we know, even with all the manipulation for the last 14 years, gold and silver both have averaged over 13% per year, including 2013 when gold went down 22% and silver went down a third. We still, even after those years, are still averaging. So, the economics, like you said, the Austrian economics are going to win in the long run, and I think they're going to win in the near term, too. I'm not talking about the next 3 or 4 months, but before Obama leaves office, I think you're going to see these metals much, much higher, and don't be surprised to see this ISIS thing really turn into another battle, which will be very positive for gold.
That will be positive for gold, but very detrimental for our country and very detrimental to our national debt, because no one's even talking about how to pay for this brand new war that Obama wants to start. So there's no talk about how to pay for it. It's just an absolute mess. These markets, folks, they move in cycles. And so right now you have gold and silver coming down as the market rises, and then things will change again, and you'll see gold and silver rising and stocks pulling back, and the Fed will constantly be messing with it and entangling itself within it. Before we run, Tom, like you said, let's hit palladium. Palladium, you've been dead on talking about palladium now for many, many months. We have seen a sharp pullback, though, a brief pullback that just occurred. Tell us what's happening with palladium.
Well, we're still at about 16% for the year, but we've had this $80 pullback since last week. It's come all the way down to like $808 from $888, and we're getting calls. What's really funny, the people that have bought it are buying more. I mean, we're getting more calls on palladium than anything, because that is a real bargain, especially we know seasonality's coming into play, not only in gold and silver, but palladium when the mines close in Siberia. I mean, the mines in South Africa are still mined, but you got 2 major locations where palladium comes from, and we're seeing shortages, and the Russians needing to sell palladium, part of their small stockpiles, to finance what all is going on with their situation with the Ukraine and China and different things. So this is a bargain for palladium. And unlike gold and silver, it's been up all year and climbing, and we finally got this first about 9% pullback, and we're still up 16% for the year. So I would just urge anybody that doesn't have palladium now, you're not going to have a better opportunity, because in the next 2 to 4 weeks, Siberia will close those mines in the Soviet Union, and they won't mine again for several months until next spring. So I think it could not be a better time to buy palladium than right this minute.
All right, Tom. Well, why don't we just tell the folks real quickly how they can get a hold of you if they want to talk to you, how it works when they call your number. They can ask you questions about gold and silver. You can tell them about the different bars and coins and all the different things that you offer. What's your phone number? And just briefly tell them what you offer.
Okay, well, they can reach us at 800-247-2812. That's 800-247-2812. And they can either talk to me or Dan or Kathleen, and they're all very experienced, and find out what kind of product they want. And if there's anybody out there that's a new listener that's not getting our email blast, they can sign up for that at ftmdaily.com and go to Precious Metals or the FTM Daily /gold and sign up, and we'll put them on the distribution list. It's completely confidential, and if they don't like it, they can unsubscribe. It's not sold or shown to anybody else. It's strictly in our possession, and we don't share those emails with anybody. So we urge everybody to get on that free distribution list. So we put out prices and things that affect the gold, silver, palladium, and platinum market. And sometime in the near future, Jerry, we'll need to get back in. While gold and silver have had a lot of volatility, the diamonds are doing the opposite. They're growing steadily, going up, but we'll save that issue for another time.
That's perfect. If you want to sign up for Tom Cloud's email, go to ftmdaily.com/gold. And when you sign up, you'll get an instant investor's kit directly from Tom that explains more about his services. And Tom, I really appreciate your expertise. Very difficult and trying times for precious metals investors, but I really appreciate your insights today.
Well, I've been through it for 38 years, and it will get better, I promise.
Appreciate that, and we'll talk to you soon.
Show me the money.
Show me the money. I can use money.
More great tips, tools, and advice coming up on Follow the Money Weekly.
Hey friends, this is Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly. Recently, we have been receiving many emails from our listeners commenting on the great help they're getting from our precious metals expert, Tom Cloud. Gold and silver are excellent hedges against the growing threat of coming U.S. inflation. Who's your gold guy? Make it Tom Cloud. With over 30 years experience with precious metals, Tom will answer all of your questions. Don't buy your gold and silver through some call center and pay inflated prices. Call my good friend Tom Cloud and speak directly with him and get all of your questions answered. For a limited time, Tom is offering free shipping and insurance on every gold and silver purchase made by our listeners. Call 800-247-2812. And when you do, tell him that Jerry Robinson from Follow the Money Weekly sent you, and he'll throw in that free shipping and insurance on your entire order. Call your gold guy, Tom Cloud, right now for the very best deals on gold and silver coins. 800-247-2812. That is 800-247-2812.
With this week's Trigger Trade Report, I'm Jennifer Robinson. Well, it was an up and down ride in the markets last week, but we certainly came out ahead with our stock trades. We earned over 8% on two of our positions, ticker symbols GLNG and CLX. In fact, GLNG earned 8.97% in only 7 trading days. Our play on Italy's stock market with ticker symbol EWI stopped out for a 3.04% loss. And in fact, 3 more of our trades stopped out, but thankfully after we had already raised the stop loss order to the break-even price. So we neither lost nor gained on those trades. We currently have 2 stocks in play in the markets, ticker symbol HBAN up 2.25%, and ticker symbol SIRI, which is flat from its buy price. 6 of Jerry's stock ideas are still awaiting his trigger price. Trigger trading is a service we provide to all of our FTM insiders in which they receive Jerry's stock trading idea every single day of the week, complete with buy price, stop loss price, exit targets, daily status updates, and commentaries. And the service is available as an FTM Insider for only $19.95 each month. You can learn more at ftmdaily.com/trigger trade. That's ftmdaily.com/trigger trade. Attention stock traders! FTM Daily is proud to announce our latest resources for stock traders of all experience levels. Are you ready to wade in the stock trading waters? Well, unlock Jerry Robinson's trading room and receive his daily stock trading idea, complete with buy price, stop loss price, exit target, and daily trading alerts. Become an FTM insider and unlock the trading room instantly. But perhaps one stock idea per day is not enough for you. No problem. Get everything in Option 1 Plus. Analyze any U.S. stock or ETF for short-term and long-term buy and sell signals with our new Trigger Trade Pro system. Find FTM Insider and Trigger Trade Pro in our online store today. Visit ftmdaily.com/store or give us a call at 800-609-5530. That's ftmdaily.com/store or call us at 800-609-5530.
There is no military solution in Iraq. There never was. The best way to protect our security and to pressure Iraq's leaders to resolve their civil war is to immediately begin to remove our combat troops.
I will promise you this. I will get our troops home. We will bring an end to this war. You can take that to the bank.
I don't oppose war in all circumstances. What I do oppose is a dumb war. Most of you know that I opposed this war from the start. I thought it was a tragic mistake. America, it is time to start bringing our troops home. It's time to admit that no amount of American lives can resolve the political disagreement that lies at the heart of someone else's civil war. It's time to admit that no amount of American lives can resolve the political disagreement that lies at the heart of someone else's civil war. That's why I have a plan that will bring our combat troops home by March of 2008. Letting the Iraqis know that we will not be there forever is our last best hope to pressure the Sunni and Shia to come to the table and find peace.
You can take that to the bank.
Imagine for a moment that somewhere in the middle of Texas there was a large foreign military base, say Chinese or Russian. Imagine that thousands of armed foreign troops were constantly patrolling American streets in military vehicles. Imagine they were here under the auspices of keeping us safe, or promoting democracy, or protecting their strategic interests. Imagine that they operated outside of U.S. law and that the Constitution did not apply to them. Imagine that every now and then they made mistakes or acted on bad information and accidentally killed or terrorized innocent Americans, including women and children, most of the time with little or no repercussions or consequences. Imagine that they set up checkpoints on our soil and routinely searched and ransacked entire neighborhoods of homes. Imagine if Americans were fearful of these foreign troops and overwhelmingly thought America would be better off without their presence. Imagine if some Americans were so angry about them being in Texas that they actually joined together to fight them off in defense of our soil and sovereignty because leadership in government refused or were unable to do so. Imagine that those Americans were labeled terrorists or insurgents for their defensive actions and routinely killed or captured or tortured by the foreign troops on our land. Imagine that the occupiers' attitude was that if they just killed enough Americans, the resistance would stop, but instead, for every American killed, 10 more would take up arms against them, resulting in perpetual bloodshed. Imagine if most of the citizens of the foreign land also wanted these troops to return home. Imagine if they elected a leader who promised to bring them home and put an end to this horror. Imagine if that leader changed his mind once he took office. The reality is that our military presence on foreign soil is as offensive to the people that live there as armed Chinese troops would be if they were stationed in Texas. Shutting down military bases
and ceasing to deal with other nations with threats and violence is not isolationism. It is the opposite. Opening ourselves up to friendship, honest trade, and diplomacy is the foreign policy of peace and prosperity. It is the only foreign policy that will not bankrupt us in the short order, as our current actions most definitely will. I share the disappointment of the American people in the foreign policy rhetoric coming from the administration. The sad thing is, our foreign policy will change eventually, as Rome's did, when all budgetary and monetary tricks to fund it are exhausted.
So you were listening to candidate Barack Obama. Don't you like candidate Barack Obama? The guy who was against this war, who said he was going to bring our troops home back in March of 2008. And yet now, President Barack Obama, not candidate Obama, but President Barack Obama is doing exactly what he blamed President Bush for doing, and that is getting entangled in other countries' civil wars. Really just quite stark when you listen to these words. In the heat of the political debates and in the heat of the campaigning, it's so easy to believe the words that come out of these people's mouths, whether it's Barack Obama or whether it's Mitt Romney or whoever the case might be, whoever's running. They'll often say things designed to get you to side with them and vote for them. And of course, we just don't really see those kinds of stark lies the way that we have with Obama. It's just so obvious. Well, last week, the Global Post put out an interesting piece that tried to determine just how many wars the U.S. is currently fighting. After their research, they came to an answer of anywhere between 0 and 134 wars. You probably have a blank stare on your face like I did. How can you have 134 wars? Or maybe a better question, how could you have 0 wars? We know we have wars now. Well, with the U.S. waging battles all across the world, and yet with none of those battles or wars, I guess, being actually declared by Congress, it becomes quite a technicality. Since the Congress has not made an official declaration of war since June of 1942, back in World War II, it could be argued that America is not technically at war and hasn't been since World War II. Of course, for the last several decades, and ever since the Korean War, the executive branch of the United States government, the president, has relied upon a broad and extremely liberal interpretation of Article 2, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. And this, of course, refers to the president as the commander-in-chief of the Army and the Navy of the United States. But the U.S. Constitution reserves the right to declare war exclusively for the U.S. Congress. And throughout the last several decades, several administrations have supported and expanded the broad interpretation of Article 2, giving the executive branch a lot of power, almost unlimited power. And supporters of this broad interpretation of Article 2 will often claim that John Adams waged war on France without congressional approval, or they'll point back to Thomas Jefferson and his spat with the Barbary pirates, among other instances. However, in each of those cases, those who have been promoting expanded powers for the executive branch have resorted to half-truths and often outright lies. Then there's the 1973 War Powers Act. This was an attempt to rein in the president and the executive branch and their power, but it's a pretty bogus federal law. It's been abused by the Congress. It's been abused by the executive branch. And under the language of the War Powers Act, the president of the United States may send U.S. armed forces into action abroad only under one of 3 scenarios. Number 1, a declaration of war by the U.S. Congress. And as we've stated, we have not had one of those since June of 1942. The second scenario, under which the 1973 War Powers Act gives the executive branch the power to launch a war, is statutory authorization. That is where the president has express authorization through a new or an existing statute. And then 3, and this, of course, is how it's been abused so greatly by the executive branch, is that the president may declare war in the event of a national emergency created by an attack upon the United States, its territories, or possessions, or its armed forces. And this war that the executive branch may wage based upon this is limited to a 90-day incursion with 60 days of actual battle and then the remaining 30 days as a kind of an extended withdrawal period. So if you're just going off a strict constitutional definition, the U.S. has not declared war since June of 1942, and all wars that the U.S. has waged since then have been illegal, unconstitutional, and therefore cannot be called quote-unquote wars. Now, most people are going to see right through that and say, well, yeah, I mean, the Constitution, maybe we don't have any constitutional wars, but we do have wars nonetheless. So most people will not be satisfied with the answer of 0. So let's just count the conflicts where the U.S. is currently launching drone attacks without an official declaration of war. If we just take that, by definition, the U.S. is at war currently in 5 places around the world right now. That would be Iraq, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Somalia, and Yemen. And as of this week, we have to add one more in, so it would actually be 6. We have to add in Syria to that list, as the bombs have already begun to drop on Syrian territory. Now, however, the Global Post article that I'm referring to here actually goes on to show that there is one more way to determine how many wars the U.S. is currently engaged in. The first one is, how many have Congress declared? And we have 0. The second one is, how many are we actually dropping bombs on? And we would have to say, well, that's 6. But there's a third way, and that is based upon where U.S. Special Operation Forces are currently operating. That is, where at around the world U.S. Special Operation Forces are either involved in combat, involved in some sort of special mission, or advising and training foreign forces. That number is a whopping 134 nations. According to the Special Operations Command of Public Affairs, elite U.S. forces were deployed in 134 countries around the globe in fiscal year 2013. So in addition to fighting conventional wars, Washington is engaged in CIA drone campaigns, extensive electronic spying, and other covert and top-secret special missions in approximately 70% of the world's nations. And remember what President Obama said in his most recent speech to the nation when he announced his plan to go to war with ISIS. Here's a brief snippet of that speech.
Our objective is clear. We will degrade and ultimately destroy ISIL through a comprehensive and sustained counterterrorism strategy. Moreover, I've made it clear that we will hunt down terrorists who threaten our country wherever they are. That means I will not hesitate to take action against ISIL in Syria as well as Iraq.
Okay, so anywhere that they are is where the United States is going to go to war with these individuals. So in other words, to Obama, the whole world is a battlefield. And you, by the way, are Mr. Obama's wallet. What the U.S. federal government has done effectively is to tell the American taxpayer that it's a good thing that you're a bankrupt government who has no vision for the future and who has no plan to solve our economic problems. It's a great thing that they violate the U.S. Constitution by invading countries and launching extensive military incursions. So what makes this even more aggravating, I think, is the fact that Mr. Obama himself, leading up to the presidency, condemned what he rightfully pointed out as Bush taking advantage of the Constitution, not referring to it, not getting a declaration of war, and then turning around and doing the same exact thing. I can hear some of you now just groveling and grumbling, saying, you know, Jerry, I know, I voted for Romney. I wish Mr. Obama wouldn't have got in, and, you know, now we have to deal with it. Interesting that you bring up Romney, because actually Romney was asked about this very specific thing. We are in luck because this question was posed to Mr. Romney during a presidential debate right before the 2012 election. He was asked if he would need congressional authorization or congressional approval and a declaration of war before dropping bombs on countries. And here was Mr. Romney's answer. Roll the tape.
Raises the question, if you were President of the United States, would you need to go to Congress to get authorization to take military action against Iran's nuclear facilities?
You sit down with your attorneys and tell you what you have to do, but obviously the President of the United States has to do what's in the best interest of the United States.
Did he need it?
We're going to let the lawyers sort out what he needed to do and what he didn't need to do.
Good old lawyers. They always have job security, don't they? Especially in Washington. Apparently, Romney said we just got to talk to the lawyers if we want to drop bombs. Well, there was another guy on the stage during that debate who actually had something else to say. Let's roll the tape.
Congressman Paul, do you believe the President needs authorization of Congress to attack strategic targets in Iran, nuclear facilities?
Absolutely. This idea of going and talking to attorneys totally baffles me. Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it? You're not allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. Now, as far as fleeting enemies go, yes, if there's an imminent attack on us, we've never had that happen in 220 years. The thought that the Iranians could pose an imminent attack on the United States is preposterous. There's no way. This is just this is just war propaganda. Continued war propaganda, preparing this nation to go to war and spread this war not only in Iraq but into Iran unconstitutionally. It is a road to disaster for us as a nation. It's a road to our financial disaster if we don't read the Constitution once in a while.
Around the horn, Congressman.
So there was Mr. Ron Paul, Congressman Ron Paul, who's now retired, saying, you probably don't want to talk to the attorneys about dropping bombs on countries like Mr. Obama does, and now has Mr. Romney wanted to, but instead, you want to consult the Constitution. The Constitution tells you how to do all of this. Just a few days ago, Fox News was pushing a prophetic tape, a prophetic audio of George Bush saying that if we left Iraq early, that it would turn into a quagmire. Well, I've got two better prophets for you. A, Mr. Ron Paul, who called it beforehand. He didn't need to go in and drop bombs to find that out. He said beforehand, he knew it would be a quagmire. He knew that there would be a problem there. He even said this is propaganda. I mean, after you have 15 Saudi Arabians hop on a plane, and then you have very, very strong evidence pointing to the fact that the Saudis actually financed 9/11. And after you have Osama bin Laden, who is a Saudi Arabian who is directing the attacks, why do you invade Iraq? Right? So Mr. Paul was saying this is a really bad idea from the very beginning. But you know what else? Dick Cheney had some really good things to say back in 1994 about whether we should invade Iraq or not. Let's roll that tape.
Do you think that the U.S. or UN forces should have moved into Baghdad?
No.
Why not?
Because if we'd gone to Baghdad, we would have been all alone. There wouldn't have been anybody else with us. It would have been a U.S. occupation of Iraq. None of the Arab forces that were willing to fight with us in Kuwait were willing to invade Iraq. Once you got to Iraq and took it over and took down Saddam Hussein's government, then what are you going to put in its place? That's a very volatile part of the world, and if you take down the central government in Iraq, you can easily end up seeing pieces of Iraq fly off. Part of it the Syrians would like to have to the west. Part of eastern Iraq the Iranians would like to claim, fought over for 8 years. In the north, you've got the Kurds, and if the Kurds spin loose and join with the Kurds in Turkey, then you threaten the territorial integrity of Turkey. It's a quagmire.
It's an absolute quagmire. It is an absolute quagmire all across the Middle East, all across Iraq and Syria now. Whenever we go into another country and we're going to bomb them and we're going to send our military forces over, do you get a detailed receipt of how much that's going to cost you up front? Do you have any way to contest how much they're going to spend on what operation? Have you ever been to the hospital? They charge you $100 for an aspirin. You know, the Pentagon is very similar. On September 10th, then Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld was speaking before a committee in Washington, letting them know that $2.3 trillion was missing from the Department of Defense budget. They had lost $2.3 trillion at the Pentagon. But you know, that's all chump change now because we're in an economic recovery, according to Washington and according to the Federal Reserve. And let's talk about this recovery, shall we? Since President Obama has entered the White House, the United States national debt has risen by $7 trillion. What about the 36% of Americans who don't have a penny saved for retirement? Or what about the 1 out of 7 Americans who rely upon food banks to eat in America? Or what about the 76% of Americans who live paycheck to paycheck? Or what about the $2 trillion that was paid out by the federal government in benefits last year to American citizens? What about the 1 out of 3 Americans aged 18 to 34 who still live with their parents? This is the economic recovery that Washington has been telling you about, right? And pushing along this economic recovery, quote unquote, has been the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve's artificial depression of interest rates has not only greatly enriched the same people who brought us the last economic crisis, it has also ripped off savers by giving them low interest rates. It's prodded investors globally to take on excessive risks. It has nudged borrowers to beg for just a little bit more than they normally would ask for underneath higher borrowing costs. Friends, it's beyond time to end the Fed. But let's go back to the issue at hand. Obama's worldwide war powers now, without any kind of declaration of war, are rooted in the authorization for use of military force that was originally given to Bush Jr., and it gave him the green light to start invading countries back in 2002, 2003. It reads, and this is exactly what it says, the president is authorized to use all necessary and appropriate force against those nations, organizations, or persons he determined planned, authorized, committed, or aided the terrorist attacks that occurred on September 11, 2001, or harbored such organizations or persons in order to prevent any future acts of international terrorism against the United States by such nations, organizations, or persons. Now, Obama complained about this particular authorization that was given to the president, saying that it was too broad and that it was too all-encompassing. And I don't have time to play the clip for you right now, but in essence, the Obama administration is relying upon that same exact authorization. He is using that same thing to continue moving on into Iraq and Syria. I really do believe that if you want to solve the problems in the Middle East, you're going to have to deal with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is very well known to harbor terrorists, to promote terrorists. As we've already said, the majority of the terrorists on 9/11 came from Saudi Arabia. As we told you last week, the bin Laden family was flown out of the United States the days after the September 11th attack and were never questioned, never quizzed, never interrogated, never asked any questions. So here's how you stop the war in Syria. Here's how you stop the war in Iraq. Here's how you stop President Obama from going crazy in the Middle East. Here's what you do. You ready? Here it is. You first cut all financing to ISIS. All right? Before you drop bombs on them, cut funding to them. Where is the funding coming from for ISIS? Well, we know that they have their own source of income through the oil that they have captured and are selling. But we also know that America's quote-unquote allies like Qatar and Saudi Arabia have and are continuing to finance ISIS. Why isn't the United States calling Saudi Arabia on this? Why aren't they confronting the royal family in Saudi Arabia and saying, why are you allowing this? And by the way, when Bush had authorization to go in and attack any nation that had anything to do with 9/11, and there was plenty of evidence that the money trail led back to Saudi Arabia, why didn't Bush add Saudi Arabia to the list of nations that he was dropping bombs on? Did you know that Saudi Arabia wants nuclear weapons? You know that Saudi Arabia is technically still at war with Israel? Do you know that Saudi Arabia beheads more people than almost anybody on the face of the planet? You know that Saudi Arabia supported Al-Qaeda? Do you know that the bin Laden family is friends with the House of Saud? Are you awake? Do you even know what's going on? Well, I know our audience is, but I tell you, friends, across America, they're not. They're not. People are depressed. They're worried. They're scared. They're concerned. And you know what they're doing? They're just turning to drugs. They're turning to suicide. They're turning to anything that'll alleviate the pain. You know what? Suicide now is the #1 injury-related cause of death in America. Used to be car accidents. Now suicide is the #1 way to die from an injury in America. #2 is a car accident. 30 million Americans are on antidepressants. Americans consume 80% of the world's prescription painkillers. We just make up 5% of the population, folks. And now it's all about drug legalization, right? We've got to get those drugs legal. We've got to get some freedom, right? You want freedom. If you really want freedom, Tell these guys in Washington to stop giving your taxpayer money to every single defense contractor on the face of the planet. Tell them to stop giving money to Saudi Arabia. Tell them to stop giving money to other countries that hate us. They hate us, and we give them money. But you got to hand it to the people in the liberty movement. You know, you've really got to hand it to. I love them. I speak to them all the time when I speak out at conferences. So I see the folks in the liberty movement. But you know what? Drug legalization is just a way to kill the pain, friends. That's really all it is. Look, I personally think Washington should stay out of state affairs. If the people of Colorado want marijuana legal, I don't think that the federal government should interfere. I am all for states' rights, and I think they should stay out of our bedrooms. I think that they should stay out of other areas as well. But that our nation is feeble and weak is clearly seen in our growing national obsession with the legalization of drugs. It's the immense and crushing weight of this government upon the backs of the people that has left them too broken and too scared to demand meaningful changes from their derelict leaders. Instead of shutting down the Federal Reserve, instead of demanding an end to the unconstitutional income tax, the broken people of America simply beg for legal relief to consume natural and unnatural remedies. Please, Washington, let us temporarily dull the pain. Give us something to make the pain go away. We'll keep paying for your unconstitutional wars. We'll keep paying for all of this stuff that we can't afford. Just give us some dope. Surely the end is near for America.
What if our foreign policy of the past century is deeply flawed and has not served our national security interests? What if we wake up one day and realize that the terrorist threat is a predictable consequence of our meddling in the affairs of others and has nothing to do with us being free and prosperous? What if propping up repressive regimes in the Middle East endangers both the United States and Israel? What if occupying countries like Iraq and Afghanistan and bombing Pakistan is directly related to the hatred directed toward us? What if someday it dawns on us that losing over 5,000 American military personnel in the Middle East since 9/11 is not a fair trade-off for the loss of nearly 3,000 American citizens, no matter how many Iraqi, Pakistani, and Afghan people are killed or displaced? What if we finally decide that torture, even if called enhanced interrogation technique, is self-destructive and produces no useful information, and that contracting it out to a third world nation is just as evil? What if it is finally realized that war and military spending is always destructive to the economy? What if all wartime spending is paid for through the deceitful and evil process of inflating and borrowing? What if we finally see that wartime conditions always undermine personal liberty? What if conservatives who preach small government wake up and realize that our interventionist foreign policy provides the greatest incentive to expand the government? What if the American people woke up and understood that the official reasons for going to war are almost always based on lies and promoted by war propaganda in order to serve special interests? What if we as a nation came to realize that the quest for empire eventually destroys all great nations? What if Obama has no intention of leaving Iraq? What if a military draft is being planned for the wars that will spread if our foreign policy is not changed? What if the American people learn the truth, that our foreign policy has nothing to do with national security, that it never changes from one administration to the next? What if war and preparation for war is a racket serving the special interests? What if President Obama is completely wrong about Afghanistan and turns out worse than Iraq and Vietnam put together? What if Christianity actually teaches peace and not preventive wars of aggression? What if diplomacy is found to be superior to bombs and bribes in protecting America? What happens if my concerns are completely unfounded? Nothing. But what happens if my concerns are justified and ignored? Nothing good.
All right, friends, well, that brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for choosing to allow me into your life each and every week right here on this program. It is an honor and a privilege to come into your life each and every week with this information. And as I told you at the very outset of the program, we have a little surprise for you now. It's a brand new podcast that we've started called The Kingdom Way, and I'm just going to play you one. It's a very brief, inspirational 2 or 3 minute podcast that we're putting out. I'll play you one now, and if you're interested in signing up for it, getting the RSS feed so you can actually receive it automatically, and you can do that by going to ftmdaily.com/Kingdom Way. And we'll play one of these for you right now. It's about 2 or 3 minutes long. And then at the end of that, we'll go ahead and bring it to a close. Again, remember, friends, when you want the truth about the global economy, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous week, and we'll see you right back here next Tuesday. So now enjoy this clip, and God bless.
Welcome to The Kingdom Way, an international radio broadcast that challenges believers to think and thinkers to believe. Now, here's your host, Jerry Robinson.
In the wake of the massive terrorist attack on September 11, 2001, fear gripped our great nation and served as a predominant motivator in our culture. And while this collective fear has subsided some since 9/11, our human fragility is still emphasized from these events. James, the brother of Jesus, dealt with this concept of human fragility in his epistle when he stated, "What is your life? It is even a vapor that appears for a little time and then vanishes away." James 4:14. Human arrogance states that humanity maintains control of its destiny. It incorrectly assumes that we are still steadily progressing upward in wisdom and in morality. But the Word of God claims that such arrogance is mere foolishness and leads only to death. Proverbs 14:12 tells us there is a way that seems right to a man, but its end is the way of death. Instead, the Bible declares to humanity that God is in control, and considering man's consistent failures in his attempts to rule himself, this should be a welcome and comforting thought. So though the world appears to be out of man's control, it is not out of God's control. We can rest in the knowledge that our Lord rules and reigns far above all of the mess that has been created through our arrogant ignorance. The Bible says the nations are as a drop in the bucket before the Lord. Creation is heading towards its grand climax, the return of Christ and his glorious millennial reign. God will finish what he has started. Friends, take heart that everything is going according to God's master plan, and you have nothing to fear. Remember, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of love, power, and a sound mind. Join me in prayer. Lord, teach me to trust in you in the midst of earthly chaos. Thank you for ordering my steps, my words, my heart, and my abilities. May they only serve to bring you glory forever. In Jesus' name, amen.
You've been listening to Kingdom Way Radio, brought to you by Jerry Robinson Ministries International. Learn more at jrmi.org.
All of the information contained on Follow the Money is strictly for informational and educational purposes. The views and opinions of our guests and sponsors, including Tom Cloud and Jay Peroni, are their own and do not necessarily represent the views of ftmdaily.com or Robinson Media Group, LLC. Jerry and Jennifer Robinson do hold their insurance licenses and may offer consulting on life insurance and fixed retirement income products. Jennifer Robinson is an investment advisor representative with Faith-Based Investor, LLC. Remember, never do your financial planning through podcast or radio. It's your money. Be wise. Do your due diligence and